Please welcome Jan Koutsky to our series.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm pleased to be here. Thank you to the Southwest Seattle Historical Society and to Barnes & Noble. It's great to have this little gathering, and you can hear me okay?
Yes.
And sound check on the video, you're doing okay? Okay. So, welcome. I am a West Seattle resident. These are pictures of me as a little kid. I'm the youngest of 4 kids. And so I'm the one hanging upside down from the tree there. And, and when I was a little kid, I went to Jefferson Elementary. Do you remember Jefferson Elementary? Mm-hmm. Yep. I went there for kindergarten and first grade, and then we moved around the country. But I came back and graduated from high school from West Seattle High. And in fact, my parents both graduated from high school at West Seattle High too. So long West Seattle natives, yeah. So that's my little introduction. And when I was a little kid, the house that we lived in south of the junction, just a few blocks, had a view out towards the Olympics and the water. And when I was a little kid doing my drawings, you may not be able to tell, but the upper left image there is a picture of the Olympics. And I was about 6 years old. The label on it says I was 6 when I drew that. But I would draw, my mom tells me that when I was a little kid, while the other kids were all drawing stick figures and things, I used to do page after page after page of what I called colored clouds. And they were the sunsets over the Olympics. And so I'd do these abstract things, and my mom would kind of, what's with this kid? And she finally asked me, well, what are you doing? And I said, they're colored clouds. Like, can't you tell that? And so years later, as I guess you could go forward, Clay, thank you. Eventually I learned how to draw for real, I shouldn't say for real, but I learned how to draw more. And I also worked abstractly sometimes, and my mom came to one of my shows where I had some abstract watercolors, and she came up to me and said, "You're still doing colored clouds." So time went on, and more drawings from early adulthood, I guess you could say, and eventually married, a couple of kids. I think the next one is a few more drawings. There we go. The one on the left is actually Schmitz Park. And the one on the upper one would be of course, Eastern Washington, right? And then the one on the lower right is from Lake Chelan, where there's some trees along the shore there, and I've drawn those again and again and again and again. So time goes on, and we have our own kids. So we have 2 kids, a daughter and a son, and the daughter's first and the son is second, and they're a little less than 2 years apart in age. But as they were growing up, we lived close to the Admiral Library up there, and we would go there and get stacks and stacks and stacks of picture books. So being the artist, I would sit there on the couch with a kid on each side looking at these picture books, and some of the artwork was, okay. But there was some artwork that was just stellar and inspiring. And the artist in me always thought, well, it might be kind of fun sometime, to do a children's picture book. But I never really took it seriously. But at the point where the lower right picture, I don't know their ages there for certain, but it was about those ages when I overheard this conversation in the backyard where our son said, "I'm going to jump so high, I'm going to go up into the sky." And our daughter said back to him, "Well, when you do, can you bring me back a piece of cloud? I want to see what they feel like." And I heard that and I thought, oh my gosh, there's a children's picture book. So I played around a little bit with that, not too seriously, just a little bit. And thought, well, that was fun. Didn't really give it too much more thought. And then some more time went by, and we were flying in an airplane, and our son was glued to the window, and he turned to me and said, "The mountains look like the tops of muffins, and the clouds look like ice cream cones." And I thought, well, that could be a part of that, jumping up into this anyway. So I played around with that a little bit. And then time went on and, a few other ideas, but nothing ever really serious. So eventually they both went to the same first grade teacher. And that's where I got the idea for this story. But running along with this, I'm still teaching at the college. I've been teaching there for 38 years. And I started out as a pottery teacher, and then I got into drawing and painting and all this stuff. So about this same time, the whole digital revolution began. And I thought, well, I certainly want to learn about that stuff too. So I had to teach myself the first versions of Photoshop and Illustrator and all these things, because there was no one else around to teach me that stuff. So I just had to hack away at the computer and get so fed up and frustrated and then just keep going. But eventually I pulled it all together and taught this class in digital art, which is what I've been teaching for 20 years now. So my artwork changed too, and kind of did some digital things as well. So there are those trees drawn in, the Chelan trees drawn again, and we kayak up at Whidbey and sailboat, Anyway, so I've learned the digital skills, which is what helped me when it was time to do a book for real. So time went on, kids are in first grade, or one of them's in first grade, and the first grade teacher did a unit on having the little first graders write to an important elder in their lives, like a grandparent or some other older person, for two reasons. One was to learn how to write letters. The first graders need to learn how to write letters. And then the other, of course, to bridge over the generations and to learn from each other, so the little kids could learn that, other things happened in the world before their lives, and they could learn from their elders. So let's hit the next one. Oh, I need to say something before that. So this first grade teacher had the kids write to their elders, and she sent this home to the parents. It's just a Xerox of a magazine article about grandparents being pen pals with their grandchildren and how to encourage, she called it authentic writing about their lives, learning from each other, bridging the generations, that kind of thing. So this came home to me in the packet to the parents, and just in a flash, I could see the whole book in my head. And all I had to do was spend about a year creating it. And I knew nothing about producing a children's picture book. Even though I'd looked at hundreds while sitting on my couch, I didn't know how to go about it. And this was before the internet. So off to the library I went, checking out books on how to make a book. And one of the first things I learned was children's picture books were 32 pages because of how the printing press is set up, right? So this is what I did. I made a little dummy. This is the first copy of my book, right? I made, I don't know, I can't tell you how many of these I made, and scribbled out the ideas, scribble, 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 throw it away, do another one, for 32 pages. And I learned that the first page is the title page, and then it's the copyright, then it's the dedication, and at the end of the book, they typically like to have an about the author or about the book or something. So that really takes your story down to 28 pages. So I went through many of these until I finally thought, okay, I kind of get the idea of how I want this grandchild to be pen pals with the grandmother, or and I started forming the storyline, but also thinking about the visual rhythm of the book, that some pages were going to look like a scrapbook, and then another page would be one single large image, that kind of thing. So I went through and planned all that out until I had my first copy of the book. This is it. That's the first copy. Making all the notes on what's going to be on each page. Now, from the drawing point of view, I could draw, but I had never attempted to have the people look the same from page to page to page, which is a little bit tedious. But I also decided that I was going to have to use photographs to draw from. So I called up my mom and I said, can you come over? And I have a list of all the images that I needed to have her be a model for. Our two kids were close enough in visual appearance that a lot of people asked me if they were twins, as our one grew taller than the other, kind of thing. But I used them as the model. But one of the things I decided early on in the book was I wanted this child to be gender neutral. I wanted the boys to think it was a boy and the girls to think it was a girl. So I took the pictures of our kids and just gave them brown curly hair and tried to make them gender neutral. So there's the final copy of before I started. And then I got my list together, and my mom came over and posed for me and my kids, and then I started to gather things. And for quite a while I kept thinking, so what can this grandma do with this grandchild? What can they do together? And I thought, well, they can plant gardens, they can do things. While I was planning the book, a friend of mine gave me this. Anybody recognize this? Some of you are going, yeah. Gum wrapper chain. Do you remember making these when you were probably in like middle school or something? Yeah.
And they look like neck bracelets and necklaces.
Right. Kept you busy for hours, chewing gum and using the wrappers. So I was working on this book, and a lot of friends didn't know I was, because I kind of did this late at night. I was still teaching at the college and had these young kids, and I was busy. But late at night I'd go sneak off and work on this book, and a girlfriend of mine said, I opened up my box of old stuff and I don't know what to do with this. Do you want it? And it's broken, but the whole thing was about 20 feet long. It was quite impressive. But I thought, as soon as she handed this to me, another story popped in my head where my own grandmother fell asleep with gum in her mouth. And when she woke up, all of her hair was stuck to the side of her head. And in her day, gum was a big deal. She was like a homesteading family in Lacey. And you didn't get gum. And so when they got some gum, they saved it for like 5 months and tried to stick it in places, and save it. So when she woke up and all of her hair was stuck to the side of her head, it was just so depressing because she lost her gum. But at the same time, she knew that her mom would be furious with her. And so she had her brother cut her hair, and she put on a hat in the wintertime, and she didn't take that hat off for days and days until finally her mom said, oh, what's the deal with the hat? Anyway, so that spurred an idea. And then my mom knit this sweater for our daughter. And I thought, well, Grandma's knit sweaters, so I'll include this in the book too. And the pins that are on here are pins that our daughter made in preschool, right? I thought, well, those can be in the book too. So I just started gathering things. Oh, and kids art, I grabbed a couple of, there's nothing like kids art, right? It's so nice and fresh. So I gathered up some kids art. To digress just for a second, I have to share a quote from a book called Art and Fear, written by two professors from a community college, art professors. And the art professor was talking to his daughter, and she knew that, 5-year-old daughter, and she knew that he went to the college to teach people how to draw, or went to teach them art or something. And she asked him one day, what do you do when you go to work? And he said, well, I go to the college and I teach people how to draw. And she looked at him just incredulously and said, you mean they forget? Yeah, pretty true too. So anyway, gathering up where did my first copy of my book? Here it is. So I had my list of all the things I needed my mom to model, and I had a list of what the kids and the grandma were going to do together, and on I went through that. So I gathered up the children's art that you were seeing, and I gathered up photos of that's my mom posing with kids in prep for the drawings for the book. And what's after that, Clay? Yeah, more posing for the drawings for the book. So I just had her. She was great. She just helped out quite a bit. So finally I was ready to draw. And I think, there we go. Okay. So creating the art for the book did take a year of what free time I had between teaching at the college and raising a family. The digital skills helped out too. At one point, the grandma decides to plant a garden with a grandchild, and they needed a seed packet, or packets of seeds. And I thought, well, that's going to need a logo. So I thought it could be Blackbird Pie Seed Company. So I made these seed packets, the Blackbird Pie. I can't quite do this with a microphone too. You get the idea. So this is a digital file up here at the top that I drew on the computer, and then each one of these is a watercolor that's underneath. So you can imagine that, you know, it just takes time, right? It just takes time. So the other thing I really enjoyed too with this project was I decided to make postage stamps. That I thought I think postage stamps are like little pieces of art. And I thought I would like to take an image from one page of the book and have it repeat as a stamp on the other page of the book. And sometimes when you're reading these picture books with little kids, they notice those things and they go back and forth and they pick up on that. So I spent a lot of time making postage stamps, which was very fun. And I needed to put my original artwork on a scanner and scan it, shrink it down, trim the edges, use a fake cancellation. I carved out my own cancellation stamp to cancel the postage stamp. The other theme that's in here that comes up is I wanted to think about my mom had a brother who passed away in World War II, which was before my time. But I always felt sort of cheated that I didn't get to meet that uncle. And I thought, do I approach this subject of war and death and such in the book? And I really thought about it a lot. And I thought, you know, I'm going to include that in the book because it's sort of a sad state of humanity, but has there ever been a time that there hasn't been a war going on? And I thought there's always that story to share between the generations of people who were lost and the young ones. So I decided to include that in the book too. Okay, I think we're ready to read the book. So cover, title page, copyright page. I decided to dedicate it just to our families. I just thought that was appropriate. Yeah. Okay, so I'll read it to you. When I was born, my grandma rocked me and sang to me and talked to me. She lived a long car ride away, but she would come and stay sometimes. When I got older and could draw, I mailed pictures to my grandma. She loved getting them. She sent back photographs of herself holding them, and she always had a big smile. The note up above says, "Hi, sweetie, I saw this bird in my garden this morning. What do you see in your garden?" Grandma sometimes sent me pictures that she had drawn. I drew all kinds of pictures and mailed them to her right away. And the note up above says, "I like to get ice cream with my friends. What do you like to do with your friends?" Grandma told me about her friends, and I drew pictures and wrote about my friends too. And pause just for a sec, because I want to say, kids' art, obviously. Most of these are our sons, but I love the basketball because it's drawn from below, right? And then the Ferris wheel has various family members on it, and he could name who was who on that Ferris wheel. It's kind of fun. Okay, so enter the gum wrapper chain. On every piece of stationery, I tried to put something on the stationery that related to what the letter was written about. So this letter says, "One time I fell asleep with gum in my mouth," and and so that tells that story. And below the text says, "As I grew older and learned to write, I sent stories I had written and illustrated. And she would sometimes send stories of when she was my age. It helped me to understand what life was like for her." The picture, the old-time photo, is my grandmother as a little kid. So in the letter it says, "Here's a picture of me before I cut my hair. I'm the one in the middle." Every year in the spring we would start a garden together. Grandma would mail seed packets to me and ask me to choose what I'd like to plant when she came to visit. Grandma liked to knit, so the note up there says, "Hi, sweetie, think about a sweater I could knit for you, and we'll go shopping for yarn next week. I love you." So in all of the notes, she always says, "Hi, sweetie." It's never a boy or a girl, right? Grandma liked to knit. She asked me to choose a sweater that she could make for me. Later, when Grandma came to visit, we went shopping for yarn together. I was so excited when the finished sweater arrived. I wore that sweater for 2 years. Grandma's house smelled good. It was a cross between furniture polish, cookies, and bath powder. We picked apples and made a pie and almost ate it all by ourselves. We joked and laughed that we should hide it from the others. And later, when everyone was asleep, Grandma and I would wake up and finish it together in the moonlight. We talked about things that troubled us. We would always end up laughing. We made each other feel better. We always looked forward to our letters and visits. We had such fun together. When Grandma traveled, she would send me postcards and letters of her day's adventures. I loved looking at the stamps. I had to put a plug in there to look at the stamps. I wrote to her about when we went on trips too. Grandma had a brother who died in the war. I learned a lot about him from the letters he wrote before he died. Grandma showed me pictures of when they were buddies growing up. The photo in the center is the uncle that died in World War II, but the other pictures are me and my brother. I asked Grandma where he was buried. The next time I went to visit her, she took me to his grave. We put flowers on the marker, and we looked all around at all the flowers all around us. We made a list of our favorites. And that is one of his letters included. So there's the list of all the favorite flowers. And on our way home, we stopped and bought the flowers we liked the best. And we spent the rest of the afternoon planting. In the fall, Grandma would come and visit and help make Halloween costumes. When my mom read that, she burst out laughing. Like, this Grandma's just way too good. Getting into a little fiction here. I would draw pictures of what I wanted, and she would magically make it happen. So, it is a cookie monster, and I'm the one who made it. And I went to Big Five right here to buy ping pong balls to hot glue gun onto the top up here to make the eyeballs. And our daughter's wearing a Big Bird costume that I made. This is the opposite page, like a 2-page spread of Halloween costumes, but with the tape measure, I wanted it to flip over to show the centimeter side, because some people use centimeters instead of inches, you know. It was also in the fall when Grandma showed me how to save marigold seeds. We saved them in empty yogurt cartons with the lids off so the seeds could breathe. Have any of you learned how to save marigold seeds? At this time, with my kids, somebody showed me, and I was like, that is so easy. When they dry up, the seeds are right there on the top of the flower, and you can just take your fingers and grab the seeds and pull them out and just save them for next year. So it's pretty easy to do. All winter long, I would see the seeds on the shelf and know that my grandma and the spring would both return. Our kids did do gymnastics at SPU, and they had this big foam pit, and they would try to reach up and grab the high bar. If they couldn't quite get it, they'd fall into the foam pit. And you never really knew if it was more fun to fall into the foam pit or anyway. So the note on the upper left says, I like gymnastics, but I cannot reach the high bar. I always fall into the foam pit. So Grandma, with fortune cookies up there on the stationery, says, hi, sweetie, you must look at the high bar. Imagine your hands flying up to the high bar and wrapping your fingers around the bar. Look at the bar. The text below says, I was taking gymnastics and I was pretty good at it. My friends called me the human rubber band. When I had some trouble, I wrote to my grandma about it, and she gave me some good advice. It worked, and all my teammates cheered. I called my grandma right away. She was so happy for me. Grandma has the old style phone, and grandchild has At the time, the state-of-the-art cordless phone. And I looked at this recently and went, oh, I have to do a new drawing because it's all cell phones now. Yeah, reprint, yeah. I spent hours making beautiful Valentine cards for my grandma. She did the same for me. She always found clever ways to make her cards. She told me she had to because she wasn't as good of an artist as me. Grandma was my pen pal all through my childhood. By the time I was a young adult, her handwriting became shaky, but we still understood each other. On the right is a pie crust recipe. That's an old family pie crust recipe that some of you might use. It has the egg and the vinegar in it. It's one of those fail-safe pie crust recipes. And I've had a couple of friends who have the book say, Jan, can I get your pie crust recipe? Well, it's in the book. Just pull out the book. It's there.
Go buy the book.
Well, they already had it. Years went by and I had my own baby. Grandma was very old and easily confused, but she still knew to cherish the young life she was holding. And that's my grandma with my daughter. A few weeks later, Grandma died. I learned she had made a book for me, and inside were all the letters we had sent to each other over the years. This illustration was actually fun for me to do because I had already finished those page layouts, and I laid the pages into another book, and I had my husband shoot a photo because I needed to have them distort in just the right manner, you know. So that was kind of a fun one to draw. Grandma loved me and helped me to grow. I hope I helped her to grow too. I think she knew I loved her. I will need to start a new book soon. And this is the author's notes about the book. And part of the second paragraph, if I remember right, is things to help promote being a pen pal. You know, things that you can write about with your grandchild, or things you can ask, like what sports did you play? I remember my kids asking my mom now, what sports did you play? And they were appalled that there was no soccer team for girls. They couldn't believe it. So that is the end of the book, but I wanted to share also sort of more of the process about this writing. So how many of you are authors as well? A few of you, yeah. After spending the year getting the artwork finished up, I thought, well, now what? What do you do now? So I did make a dummy. This is one of those can't hold the mic and show you the dummy, but there is the dummy. That's good enough. You get the idea. So I made, that's all right. Okay. Yeah, thank you though. So I made the dummy. And I thought, well, now what do you do? I joined the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators here in Seattle to go to some conferences and find out, what do you do? And some of the people who were already published said, well, you just send it. You just send it to the publishers. You just send it out and see who takes it. Well, those were the people who were already kind of established authors. And then there were the whole younger group, which were still older than me, who said, no, you need an agent. So I thought, well, how do you find an agent? So back to the library I went, did all this research on how do you find an agent. There's lists and lists of agents, but what do you do about that? So I finally had a list of about 25 agents that did children's picture books. I went back to my Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators roster and found the people in there who were both an author and an illustrator. And I thought, okay, they've done children's picture books. And I called the ones that were not long distance phone calls. And I asked them, do you have an agent? Well, a lot of them didn't have an agent, but some of them did. And the ones that did, I was giving them an opportunity to vent. And I heard all about agents. And off of this list of 25 names, I think at the beginning it was actually more like 50 names. Anyway, you get the idea. So I started going, And it took it down to probably 25 agents. Okay, well now I'm at 25, so now what? Well, of course, there's a book about agents. So I got the book at the library, read through about these 25 people. Some of them weren't even in business anymore, so that was easy, cross those off. But in my phone call, the other thing I did too is I went back to the library and checked out stacks again of all these children's picture books. And I had this list of agents, and I had these mounds of picture books, and I went through to see who they thanked at the beginning of the book. Did anybody thank their agent? So I found a couple names where they thanked their agent, but going back to the phone calls, there was one person who loved her agent. And I thought, whoa, one. So that was the agent I targeted. But the agent needs a query letter. Back to the library. What's a query letter? How do you do a query letter? It has to be one page. These agents get about 250 query letters a week. So you have to make yours look pretty darn good. So I spent all this time. I wish I kept it, but I didn't. But I took all the images from the book. It took me a month to make the query letter because I wanted it to look really good. So I had little imaging, one page with images from the book. Going down the column, I had comments that people had said about the book, quoting people, friends of mine, of course. It wasn't published yet. But I had a quote from a teenager, or a quote from the first grade teacher, all these things. Sent off my perfect little query letter and waited, and the agent said, yes, I'll look at your book. Like, oh my gosh. So I had this prepared. This in itself takes quite a bit of time because I have to put each image on the scanner and scan it and glue it in there. And, it just takes a ton of time. But I had one that I, hoped that someone would ask to see it. So I mailed it off, and it took a couple months, but the agent said, sure, I'll show it around. So I asked, how many copies do you want? And I said I could make maybe 3. And she said, that'd be great. So I sent her 3 copies. She sent the 3 out all at once, which all the information I read said that's a no-no. You send them one at a time. But she didn't do that. She sent them all 3 out. Reject came back. She turned it right around and sent it out again. So there were, I think, 2 rejects. She sent it back out. And on that second round, Boys Mills Press said they'd publish. And that itself took 9 months. So by this time, the book has been, it's like 2 or 3 years now. It took me a year to do the art. It took me a while to research it. It just took lots of time. But we signed the contract probably in about late 99 or early 2000, somewhere in there. And they have it for 2 years before it comes out. And one of the first things they do is they send out what they call an author questionnaire. And that's where you get to put your input in for how you picture the book to be marketed. And so I filled that out, and I said that it should be marketed towards first and second grade teachers, because the idea came from the curriculum for first and second grade teachers. And I thought it would be great if someday this book could work its way back into the first and second grade classroom. So I filled out my marketing statement that way, to market it towards that group. And of course grandparents too. So they did, but you don't see it for 2 years, It's in production. And eventually this box arrives on the porch with my 25 copies that I was allowed in my contract, and the book's been published, which was great, right? So they did market it, and it received a Teacher's Choice Award from the International Reading Association. So that was kind of nice, because I thought, it went full circle. It went back into the classroom. So that was really fun to have that happen. So time went on, and as a lot of you know, in the publishing industry, so it came out, the original, let's see here, I have one. The original came out in 2002, and eventually, with the publishing industry being a mess, right, with the downturn of the economy, everything's falling apart, newspapers are folding, bookstores are closing, publishers are closing, being bought out. It's just a mess. Well, one of the things I'd learned in all my research was, as an author, you might go into a bookstore one day to buy a copy of your own book to give as a gift, and you'll be told, no, it's out of print. And that's how you find out that it's out of print. So that happened with the hardbound, and knew that, of course, it would eventually happen. And the advice I had read was, when that happens, go home immediately and call the publisher and ask how many of those books are sitting on the warehouse shelf, and buy all of them. So I did, and I was told there were 12 books in the warehouse. I said, okay, I'm buying all of them. That officially made it out of print. And then that triggers the agent to contact the publisher to see about the follow-up contract for a paperback or movie rights or whatever. So I knew that I needed to email my agent and say they're officially out of print now. I bought the last copies, and she knew what to do, so she contacted the publisher and said, what about a paperback? Well, I knew that no way, because the publishing industry was a mess in 2010, right? I knew they weren't going to do a paperback. But what needed to happen was that the publisher needed to sign off on it and say, we're not doing that. And then they would return the original artwork to me, along with a letter, which is like a legal document stating that the rights revert back to me. So that all happened in about 2011, maybe, something like that. Yeah, something like that. And I had it, and I thought, okay, well, I've got all the artwork, and every now and then somebody would say to me, you know, Jan, I wanted to get your book, but I couldn't because it's out of print. And I thought about that, and this was when all of the Amazon print on demand and all the ebooks. And because I've been teaching the digital art classes at the college for quite a while, I have those digital skills, and so I thought, I think I'll do an ebook. So I got out the original art. I had to rescan everything, rebuild all those pages in Photoshop with all the layers palette and all this stuff, and produce the ebook. And you know, I always thought of, do you remember the Barefoot Bandit who learned how to fly a plane from the internet? Remember that guy? I thought, if he can learn how to fly an airplane from the internet, I can certainly figure out how to publish an ebook on the internet. So sure enough, you plug in how to publish an ebook, and there it is. And I understood all of the technical lingo because I've been teaching this digital art stuff for so long. They're talking about PDFs and HTML and JPEGs and TIFFs and all this stuff. And I thought, yeah, I get all that. So I thought, I'll do this as an ebook for Kindles and Nooks and iPads and all that. And I wanted it to keep it really cheap because I wanted it to be available. And it's not about making money as such, right? It's just making it available. And I thought, if it's the price of a cup of coffee, that'd be just about right. So I priced the ebook at just $3. And then I thought, okay, now I've finished that whole mess of a project. Let's look into this print-on-demand business. So I went on back to the internet, how to publish, and of course ended up at Amazon's Create Space is the name of their company. And again, of course, they're talking about JPEGs and PSDs and TIFFs and all that stuff. And I get all this stuff. So the original book is 8.5 by 11, obviously turned this way. And on Amazon's, for the paperback, they also said 8.5 by 11. I thought, perfect, I can do that. So I went through and I did the whole book at 8.5 by 11 and got to the final order a copy now for preview button. And there was never an indication as to where the binding would be. And I learned they were only going to bind it this way. So my artwork was done like this, but the binding was done like that, and it came back with the binding across the top like you're going to flip through it like a calendar. Like, oh my gosh. So I had to go back to have a little chat. What do I do? And they said, well, you have to do 8.5 by 8.5 because the binding is only going to be on that side. So in essence, it's printed. What am I trying to say? It's chopped off. Does that make sense? Yeah, so it's still at 8.5. I'm sorry, I should be holding it that way. It's still 8.5, but not by 11. It's 8.5 by 8.5. And then, gosh, color is always an issue with printers. And I know that from other projects I've worked on. So I went through, color was a nightmare. I get the first one back to preview, and everything is so dark and so red. So I have to go through and change all the digital files again, order another copy. I went through 12 previews, but I finally thought, you know what, good enough. And with Amazon's print on demand, the Create Space company, I thought again, I want to price it cheap. I want to have it be like, you know, $5.99. Oh, I learned that Apple is the one that drives the 0.99 cents. Anything you purchase has to be 0.99 cents, according to Apple. That's how they've set that up. So it had to be 99 cents something. So I thought, okay, I'm going to make it $5.99. I had looked at some other children's picture books that were on this format, and I thought, yeah, $5.99, that's fine. So I plugged that into Amazon's thing. And then they ask you things like, well, do you want this also to be available to schools and libraries? And, well, yeah. So now it's $7.99. And, well, did you want it to be available in Canada? Sure. So now it's $9.99. You know, it kept, anyway, so Amazon had its own pricing system that I just had to kind of go along with. So now it's $9.99. Anyway, so that's the process. So by the time I jumped through all those hoops, I felt like it's now available again, and now I'm here. So that's the process. There's only one more, and we can turn that off. This is just the back cover, and we're done with those images. So, so that's my story. Thank you. Yeah.